It Came from the Swamp by B.W. Byers, 2233. The story you're about to read is 100% true. The only things changed are names and locations have been removed. This isn't a joke. This isn't a gimmick. This story happened to my father. Before he passed away, he would tell this story to anyone who would sit down around a warm fire on a cold night. The body of this story is written in first person, as though my dad himself was telling it to you. Although it pains me that I'll never hear him tell this story again, it brings me great joy to share this with you. I always loved hearing my father tell this story, and I hope you enjoy it as well. So get comfortable, turn your lights off, and imagine with me that you're sitting next to me around a campfire, listening to my father tell us of his haunting tale. This story takes place in the autumn of 1977 at a camp that belonged to a friend of mine named Dave. I worked with Dave at Fisher Body, one of the automobile factories owned by General Motors. Dave had a camp in a swampy area and had agreed to let me bear hunt out of it. I wasn't alone on this bear hunting trip. My companions were my wife Sarah, little sister Whitney, and her husband Clive, and my hunting buddy Rick. There are many stories I could tell you about, but I will refrain. Both Rick and I brought our bear hounds with us. The hounds pick up a scent and run the bear until it trees, and then the hunters move in towards the tree for the kill. Bears have been known to kill or injure many a dog when they come out of the tree. But I've been very successful hunting bears in the UP, and by God's grace, I've never lost a single dog. Enough of that. Let's get to the tale. Bear season opened September 10th, and we were up for a 2-week hunt. We had gone bear hunting that morning, and we run a bear, but it avoided us. So we went back to the camp. There was me, Rick, Clive, Whitney, and Sarah. Me, Rick, and Clive were sitting there, and we got up and started a fire. We just sat around chit-chatting while the girls were in the cabin making dinner from a raccoon Rick had shot the day before. We had our hounds, and just before the girls called us in, all of my dogs I had tied up around the edge of the swamp jumped up and went right to the end of their chain and started barking at the swamp. We were looking down there, but it was just dark enough to where we couldn't see anything. Then, all at once, every dog went back to the tree I had them tied to and laid down, except one. They were all shaking and shivering, except for that one dog, that little shotgun. She was my little blue tick hound. She finally laid down, but she didn't act so scared as the others. Every one of Rick's dogs ran right in their doghouse. It was the strangest thing. If it had been a bear, they wouldn't have acted like that. They would have wanted to get after it. We went ahead and went in and had dinner. Then we went back out that night and had the fire going while we sat around and talked about the events of the day. The girls made dessert and called us in, so we went in and played euchre. That's what we play in Michigan. It was really warm for September that day, and after we got done playing cards, we all got ready for bed. We never thought about latching the screen door because of just how hot it was that night. So we went to bed, and in the morning, I heard the screen door open. And at 1 a.m., I heard the screen door squeak open and then thump shut. I heard something open, and I heard it stirring in the kitchen. The cabin was just 2 rooms. The dining room and bedroom were just one big room, and there was also a living room. There was no electricity, so it had a gas lantern hanging from the ceiling that hung down about a foot. The only other source of light came from the full moon coming in through a big picture window. There was a full-size bunk bed, and Rick was in the top bunk, and Sarah and I were in the bottom. You could see almost like daylight in the kitchen, and all at once I could hear something moving around. Whatever made the noise walked right in front of the table and turned just like it knew right where we were. It was standing right under the light, and it was humped over so it wouldn't hit its head on the light. Its arms were hanging down. They seemed like they were way past its knees because it was bent over. It was just standing here, staring at us. It looked right at me, and then I raised up on one elbow and was watching it. At first, I thought it was a bear, but then I realized it couldn't be because of its ears. I could see plain as day. They were on the side of its head like a human, not on the top like a bear. It just stood there staring at us. Every one of our guns were out in the trucks. We never had a gun in the cabin, which was probably a good thing. If I had tried and failed to get to a gun, we all might have gotten killed. I just laid there, and it just kept staring at us. But it would just stand there. It would move his head and shift itself, but then it would just keep staring at us. And my dogs were outside just whining and carrying on, scared to death. If it would have been a bear, they would have been going nuts, but they were just whining. I had a big 8-cell battery flashlight that we would sit between the bunk bed and the day bed. It was there just in case someone had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. They could just reach down there and get that light. It wasn't there. It was always there. I was gonna turn it on. I wanted to know exactly what it was. I didn't know whether Whitney had gotten it and went out earlier to go to the bathroom and didn't put it back or what, because it was always put in that one spot. It just watched me while I was reaching around. That's when I thought to myself, we were all Christians, so if he attacks, we would be fine. He stood between us and the only door out of the cabin. We would have had to go through him or around him. There was no other way out of there. Finally, I pretended like I was sleeping in an effort to make it go away. When I opened my eyes to take another peek, I saw that it had moved towards us. It was only about 5 feet from where I was laying. I started to panic and was getting ready to start fighting if I needed to, but then I heard the screen door open and thump shut. The dogs were just scared to death, but it never seemed to bother any of the dogs. It just left. So I just laid there. I couldn't go back to sleep. I just held my breath and prayed that it wasn't coming back. After I was sure whatever it was wasn't coming back, I slipped out of bed and crept over to the doorway. When I looked out into the night, I saw it peeking at me from around my truck. My blood ran ice cold, and I quickly, yet quietly, closed the main door and deadbolted it shut. Around 2:30 a.m., my sister Whitney woke up and had to go pee. She came over to me and said, Wyatt, what in the world is wrong with those dogs?" Trying not to cause a panic, I lied and said, "I don't know. Why?" She said, "Just listen to them. They're out there crying. There's something wrong." After a long and probably suspicious pause, she said, "I really have to pee. Will you walk out to the toilet with me?" Wanting to do literally anything other than that, I said, "Yeah, sure I will." I reached out for the flashlight again, and I asked, "Where's that flashlight? I usually keep it right here." And she said, "Oh, I put it on the nightstand." And I reached over, and instead of putting it between the beds, she had set it on the nightstand. She pointed at the nightstand and said, I just set it up there. Figured it made more sense than having it between the beds where it can get lost." And probably for a good reason. There's no telling what might have happened if I pointed a flashlight at that thing. But anyway, I walked her out. I walked her and she took the flashlight, and I stood halfway between the outhouse and the cabin. She went to the bathroom and we came back in. The dogs were still all shook up. She shook her head and said, "I wonder what's going on. Something has them all shook up." Well, I didn't want to tell her anything. I was the only one that saw it, and as far as I could tell, we were safe now. Then, off in the distance, I heard a snap of a branch or something. Wendy stopped and asked, "What is going on, Wyatt?" I assured her it was just a raccoon, and we went back inside and back to bed. She gave me a curious look when I deadbolted the door, but she didn't say anything. By the time we'd got back to our beds, the dogs had settled down a bit. I took that as proof that we were going to be okay. I slept a little, and I got up about 5 in the morning because we like to leave at daybreak to go out looking for bear tracks. I started breakfast while the others woke up. We had eggs, potatoes, and some breakfast sausage. I started it, but Sarah finished making it. While they finished making breakfast, I put the dogs in the dog boxes on my truck. After breakfast, about 5:30 a.m., we all headed out. Whitney and Clive were in their truck, and the rest were with me in my truck. Dave had a cable across his drive, and after we got through the cable, down the trail about 300 yards, I got my dog Sport out. I would always put one dog down out in front of the truck and just drive slowly behind him as he went down the trail. He would go after the bear, and I would jump out of the truck and get the other dogs out and send them after him. We went down this one game trail, and he acted squirrely, like he didn't want to. He usually would drift back and forth, but this time he stayed right in front of the truck. He would go down a ways, and he'd stop and look back at me, nervous as a cat in a dog kennel. We walked this game trail all the way back to the highway where Rick and Sarah met us, and I got him and loaded him back into the truck. Then we went south on the highway toward the cabin about 3/4 of a mile and turned left on a trail that headed toward a lake that we knew bears liked to hang around. There was a big cherry tree that the bears couldn't resist. At that time of the year, they are dead ripe, and the bears were getting fattened up for hibernation. I went over to the cherry orchard and took Sport all through there looking for tracks on a scent trail. We almost always would start a bear in there, and he just didn't act right, so I loaded him back up in the truck. We went back down the road and turned south about 1/8 of a mile to another little trail. When we went, there was a little lake that I mentioned. I loaded him back up and drove northeast around the lake because it was a bit too bulky for me, When I got him back out, he caught a whiff of something and he froze in his tracks. He smelled something he really didn't like, but after some coaxing, I got him to keep going. So, in the meantime, I'm sitting on the hood of the truck so I can watch him better, and Sandra was driving the truck. So I had her stop and I slid off the truck, and I started walking with Sport. Sport went down this trail and I walked down the trail behind him. The trail comes to a point on the back side of the lake. The swamp ran all the way from the cabin down to the lake. I followed him all the way to the end of that trail, and he came to the end of that point and threw his nose up in the air and just stopped. And he just froze, staring down at the lake. He kind of growled a little bit, and all the hair jumped up from his tail to his nose. It just bristled right up, and he just stood there, staring down into the swamp. I started looking down where he was staring, but I couldn't see whatever he could. He looked at me and he just turned around and started back toward the truck, stiff-legged and breathless. I followed Sport, walking just as hard as I could go. I just knew that he saw something bad. The hair on the back of my neck stood up because I knew that if it had been a bear, Sport would have gone right down there after it. He headed right back to the truck, and I had the tailgate down on the truck. When we got close to the truck, he took off running and he jumped right into the truck and began trying his hardest to get into the dog box with my other dogs. I still hadn't told Rick and them anything about the night before, but I was beginning to think that I ought to. That evening, after we got back to the cabin, I told everyone what had happened the night before. Whitney was immediately angry and wanted to go home, and I said, "It never bothered us. It came in the cabin, but we'll make sure we shut the doors now." It just stood there looking at us. And anyway, we stayed up there. We had another full week to hunt. As far as I know, it never bothered us anymore, and I never bothered it. If I would have turned on that flashlight, there is no telling what might have happened. 4 months later, while on Dave and my lunch break at Fisher Body, he told me that he went back up to his cabin for a weekend getaway. When he got there, he saw that his cabin had been broken into and trashed. The only thing in there that wasn't ruined was on the bottom bunk, the bunk that Sarah and I were sleeping on. I didn't tell him about the experience I had, but I knew that whatever that thing was had broken in. I'm not sure what it wanted with us, nor why it went out of its way to deliberately preserve where I was sleeping. After all these years of telling this story to my friends, children, and grandchildren, I still don't know what it was. And I pray to God that I never find out.